I really do want to start by acknowledging that I'm really grateful to be on beautiful Gadigal land. I was, and I think many people in the room this morning, really moved by the very generous and very thoughtful welcome to country by Uncle Mike. So much wisdom that I took from that, and I'm sure all of you are the same. I'd like to pay my respects to elders and ancestors and also First Nations colleagues who are in this room today. As panel chair, my job is actually a really simple one, and that's to provide a platform for the deep subject matter expertise of three colleagues who are joining me on the stage: Evette Smeathers from Horizon Power, Kate Minter from Rewiring Australia, and Damien Sullivan from Brotherhood of St Laurence. So you're going to hear from each of the three panellists for approximately 10 minutes each. We've then got a big chunk of time. I think we'll have at least 30 minutes, maybe a little more, for audience questions. And I guess this bit is really important. If you've got a question, please submit it via the app. As Evette, Kate and Damien are speaking, anything that sparks your interest, anything that you'd like to dig deeper into, anything that you'd like the panel to expand on, please submit your question. Don't hold back. Start submitting those questions at any time. We really want to create an active learning environment that enriches our understanding of a few things. Firstly, how can we help all consumers realise the benefits of electrification? Secondly, what kinds of help consumers will need? And thirdly, a really kind of deep conversation about what our key messages should be to households and small businesses who are currently overwhelmed by information. I think that personas activity that we all went through, experienced earlier on in the session today, is really kind of helpful to have at the back of our minds. So it's my job to introduce the first speaker, my colleague Evette Smeathers. Evette's the Executive General Manager of Customer and Community at Horizon Energy. She's going to share insights from the Esperance Electrification Project in Western Australia. Please join me in welcoming Evette.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here. I'd also like to respectfully acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation as the traditional custodians of the lands which we're meeting today. We recognise and appreciate a continued connection through stories, traditions and living cultures, and commit to a better and brighter future together. What I've noticed really when I've been talking to people in the breaks is how different Horizon Power is to many of the organisations that supply energy in the eastern seaboard. So I'll take a little bit of time to provide some context to you all. I think that our being quite unique in the way that we're structured gives us some quite interesting opportunities, and we see that we end up being a bit of a sandbox for trialling new products and new kind of projects to solve some of the challenges that it sounds like you're all facing within your service areas. So Horizon Power is small in terms of total customer numbers, with about 53,000 customers, but we're big in terms of the size that we cover, 2.3 million square kilometres. And to put that into perspective, it's more than 2.5 times the size of New South Wales. Not that it's a competition, guys. So we're 38 systems, predominantly microgrids. So they're isolated, not connected to a larger grid network. And we're in the process of transitioning across 141 new Aboriginal communities to our service area as well. Like many of you, governed by a uniform tariff policy, and the cost to serve and cost to provide energy within regional Western Australia can be quite expensive. So it gives us some really unique opportunities to test things behind the meter. So I'm here to share with you the story of a project we undertook in Esperance, electrifying Esperance. I'm going to take 10 minutes to say what Audrey summed up in one line, which is make it easy and make it about them. Brendan also gave us a nice segue in his presentation when he spoke about what happens if reticulated gas stops. And that was essentially our burning platform. So 2021, the independent gas provider in Esperance said that they were no longer going to be providing their service, which meant there'd be about 400 customers that would be stranded in terms of their reticulated gas supply. So we worked with our key stakeholders in Energy Policy Western Australia to find what would be an alternative that we can transition those customers across to, and we were able to secure $10.5 million of state funding for that project. So the project took about 12 months to facilitate and deliver. What we had to do was negotiate with the gas provider to extend their supply period for a little longer to really give us an opportunity to engage effectively with the customers so they knew what was going to happen as part of that transition project. So what happened over the 12 months is we thankfully had no safety incidents, which is a great outcome, and recorded 94% customer satisfaction rate, so also a really good outcome. I think the biggest boon for the community of Esperance is the 38% reduction in energy bills that was forecasted and is being realised within that community. So I'll go through a little bit of learnings by segment. So the residential segment was by far the easiest segment to support. Of the 228 residential customers, about 75% of those customers transferred over to 100% electrical replacement alternatives. 9.5% of them went to an LPG replacement, and 15.5% went to a hybrid solution. So what we did to help those customers facilitate the transition was, we'll go through a little bit more in detail, but they essentially had like an in-person stakeholder manager that could help them navigate that, any questions that they may have and any concerns they may have. And we also had a specialist gas support. So if they did want to transition to an LPG gas, that it wasn't just, us providing a, electrical solution, it was also about giving them really informed position with regards to an alternate gas solution. And I think that was important, so customers didn't feel like their hand was being forced of one product. It was, they had some alternatives that existed there, which shows within the mix of uptake. When it comes to the customers in the business sector, that was obviously a lot more complex, and there was 24 customers in that segment, so not a huge suite of customers, but what you saw is the span across the size of consumption within that segment was quite large. The smaller use customers from the businesses, pretty much 100% uptake to electrical alternatives, but it was that bigger end of the system that they were really challenged to find appropriate electrical alternatives to provide the service that they needed to provide. We supported them with energy audits and also specialist trades if they were required on site. It was only 40% uptake in this sector that went across to full electrical. And that's, like I say, it was pretty much due to the fact that there was no alternatives for a number of those different customers. And hopefully that's something that as you should see greater levels of electrification, then you see the product development in order to meet those needs of those customers. So in terms of the journey for those customers and the uptake rates, the engagement process started in April 2022. We held an Esperance Town Hall and then looked at community campaign engagements from that point on. What I can probably say is that the early phase, we relied a lot more on digital channels, and what we saw in a community like Esperance, which has a higher average age than the state of Western Australia as a whole, they probably didn't really engage with the digital channels as well as maybe some others may do. And so we then transitioned in response to that to a lot more hands-on, one-to-one, in-person sessions, and we saw a much better, participation rate occurring after that. There was some conversations earlier about the fact that there is some cynicism, I suppose, around alternates. So things like the induction cooking, for instance, people didn't know whether they were going to like that as an alternate product. So what we did is held a celebrity chef coming down to Esperance and doing a cooking demonstration, and people were able to touch and feel what the end product would look like. And you saw a big conversion after that point in time. So you can see there was, there's a point in time and you can see quite an uptick. So I think it's really important to make sure there's that people element that's included within the conversation. And what we also did is made sure that that connection process was really simplified, four-step process that people could understand what point they were in that process. And I think it really demystified that for people as they were connecting. So what did we learn? Firstly, that change is slow, and you really, as you know, I'm speaking to the converted here, but it has to be a customer-first approach. Education is key, so we did 17 direct newsletters, we did 2 media campaigns and a celebrity cooking demonstration. Customer engagement drives action. So community forums, we had 120 door knocks, 2,000 outbound calls, and that one-on-one customer support at every stage with consistent on-the-ground support. 80% of our customers said that they preferred in-person versus online application process, so we had a dedicated stakeholder manager, as I mentioned. The other thing that we noticed is that you can expect that customers will wait till the end to agree to uptake on the electrification, so you really need to be mindful in terms of profiling your workload. Local constraints as well. We used local trades wherever we possibly could do, and I suspect that they became quite strong advocates for the project as well. When we think about how do we get your Bryans on board, I think, if you can get a really good local engagement activities, I think that helps people to have a level of trust in the work that you're doing. 88% of the installations were completed by local trades. That equated to 84% of the total spend was local trades, which I think is a great outcome for a small community like Esperance. You may, though, need to supplement trades outside of a local content. So we looked at, obviously, specialist trades, particularly in that more the commercial sector, and we supplemented and brought them in where we needed to. And also just be really mindful of your value chain when you're going through these projects. Lead time and cost of supply around these electrical appliances were a bit of a challenge over time. The other thing is, all of you guys know very well that each customer is unique. So that recognising the individual choices for each of the households is super important. Setting up case management with a clear and easy escalation pathway. So essentially each house was allocated a budget for replacement of their, of their appliances, but they could also look to co-contribute if they wanted to increase the quality of the equipment that they had. And then there was an independent escalation pathway so that if it went through and people were concerned about the process, there was, an opportunity to mediate an outcome. That acknowledging the really vast and various needs of individual businesses and really getting to understand their drivers is super important. And being adaptable and responsive obviously builds trust. So that's it from my side. The knowledge sharing report is available and has a lot more detailed content in there. And of course, I'm happy, you can tell I'm pretty enthusiastic about these things. So feel free to grab me in any of the breaks if you want to have any conversations or have any further questions. And we're just going over to a small video that gives a bit of a summary of the project from a customer's perspective. Thanks, everyone.
When Esperance was looking at transitioning away from gas, the first reaction was a bit of a concern around the availability of tradesmen and also equipment and appliances and that were in town, and how we were going to get that all to roll into a smooth transition.
Because we had solar panels, we chose to go with everything electric because it's just more convenient.
It was sort of an easy one, really. One, our properties wouldn't have handled having those sort of awkward big gas bottles sitting in an area, and our appliances were due an upgrade. We got offered the latest technology, the latest power systems in terms of using electricity. Definitely cheaper, definitely a better way to go.
I didn't want to be the guinea pig that was going to see whether that was going to work or not, or whether we would still get the odd blackout. I decided to go back to bottled gas. Due to the fluctuations that we get with the power here and the surges, expense-wise it makes no difference as far as I'm concerned. I'm equally poor either way.
I had quite a few appliances changed, so I went from gas hot water to an electric heat pump. I went from a gas heater to a split cycle reverse air conditioning, but my favourite's this. I went from a gas cooktop to an induction cooktop, and it's brilliant. It cooks really well and it is super easy to clean.
We went out of pocket because the government supported the changeover. There was an amount available for each business or household, and we stayed under that amount.
So Horizon Power gave us a list of registered trades, so electricians, plumbers, etc. Every property is unique, so everyone had their different things they had to deal with in terms of location of their services and disconnection of the gas system. The local guys were the experts. Horizon Power made sure that they were up to date on what was available with the latest systems, and they definitely offered the best out there.
It was very simple actually. All we had to do was email them, and the plumbers and the electricians practically did everything. And because my gas hot water system stopped before it was totally organised, I just made one phone call and they came in and did it. It was fantastic.
We attended the cooking demonstration. We'd already ordered a ceramic top stove, and I said to my husband, we need to go and have a look at this induction cooking show so we can have a look and see what the induction is about, and went there and I thought, oh no, we need this because it's a safety thing for my grandchildren as well that we're looking at, and we were able to swap over to the induction.
If you can take that advantage with the modern technology, with the latest items available to you, and have that opportunity to change to electricity, I would definitely do it.
Fantastic. That was excellent. We're going to hear from our second speaker, Kate, in a moment, but I might just share a reflection that I guess I had from your presentation as well just now, Evette. And I think one of the learnings for me was just around that agile approach to engagement tactics. So I think that really material, kind of tangible example that you gave when, originally your suite of tactics included a really strong focus like on digital engagement. And when you realised that wasn't working for the Esperance community, you didn't just dig in and do more digital. What you did was say, well, how do we need to adjust kind of the engagement mix here? What other tactics do we need to bring in? And that really kind of personalised, one-on-one engagement, group engagement, etc. So that was a really great insight that I took from your presentation. Before I throw to Kate, I guess, there's a lot of excitement about the lessons and insights from Esperance. What do you see as kind of next? Like, what opportunities do you see for the Esperance community to participate in new energy futures, Evette?
I think obviously the electrification has been a really important process, and I think we've done a number of things in the Esperance community that's kind of built up an appetite for viewing change. And one thing that we've rolled out recently is a product called Sunshine Saver, which was acknowledging that not all customers can participate in solar themselves because they may not own their roof space or they may not be able to have that capital outlay for a solar system. So we've done a new subscription service. So part of our new power station down there has about 55% renewable, 50% renewables with wind and solar. And so we've kind of now got that solar farm. People can buy into the solar farm essentially rather than putting solar on their roofs. And that's a subscription service that's only available for people that qualify. So based on whether they're kind of registered hardship customers or whether they have, they have concession card holders, they can't be homeowners, they can't have subsidised electricity from their companies, either from a business or their employer. So I think it's about a way to try and bring some of those new renewable energy economies to those that maybe find it difficult to access. So I think there's a number of different ways you can help customers in that space.
Great. And just to plug again, remember, if you've got any questions that you want to ask Evette or other panel members to kind of expand on, start putting those, uploading those questions into the app as well. So it's now my pleasure to introduce Kate Minter from Rewiring Australia. Kate is the Managing Director, where she works across the organisation's advocacy, community and research work to help bring to life the organisation's big vision to electrify everything. I'm really looking forward to this presentation. I was just mentioning to Kate before, obviously Rewiring Australia's work is very well known to people in this room, but also I think really having a lot of cut through more broadly in community, and I've really enjoyed just refamiliarising myself with some of the resources and the great kind of research, policy subs, etc. on that website. And I think the policy communication is exceptional. It's a really technical space. So really looking forward to Kate's presentation. Please join me everyone in welcoming Kate.
Thank you. That's an introduction that I feel a pressure now to perform. I also feel like my presentation really needs some more beautiful beachscapes in it, Evette. I've got a lot of boring graphs for you all, so please bear with me. So yes, I'm Kate, I'm from Rewiring Australia. Our mission is to electrify everything. We're a research, advocacy and communications group. Today I wanted to talk through some of the policies that we've been exploring around how do we make electrification more accessible and acknowledging some of those very real barriers that are going to exist as we seek to electrify every household in the country. Our focus is on the electrification of everything, so across business, households and industry, and I was really interested to hear some of the barriers, particularly on the business front. But today I was really focusing on households. It's a real low-hanging fruit and a real opportunity for us to drive really effective comms, but looking at some of those barriers and particularly equity issues around electrification. So we need to electrify the fossil fuel burning machines in our homes. And this is a little drawing of what they look like. I think you're all familiar in this room of what we mean when we talk about electrification, but this is just a fun cartoon that shows you what it looks like. We've seen governments across Australia already recognising the need to invest in this transition from an energy savings consumer's perspective, but really largely from an emissions reduction side. So last year in the federal budget, the announcement of the Home Energy Upgrade Funds was a huge win, $1 billion to help support households access finance products to electrify. But we need to do more. And we need to move quickly. Looking at the climate science, it's a little bleak, so I won't spend too much time on this, but we need to electrify our machines quickly. That graph on the left shows us, the green line, how dramatically we need to reduce our emissions to hit a 1.75 degree world. And it's pretty dire. The black line there is showing us what our existing policies at 2020 is going to get us to in terms of our trajectory. And that dotted black line shows us how much more we reduced after the Inflation Reduction Act in the US. That's the world's largest economy and the biggest climate bill we've ever seen passed, and it has taken a big lot of that pressure in terms of the policies we need to enact to be able to reduce our emissions, but it's not getting us anywhere near as close as we need to be in order to maintain the emissions reductions we need. That graph on the right there, all the different colours, shows us what those trajectories of replacing our gas and fossil fuel machines in our homes need to look like in order to stay on target, and it's pretty dramatic there. Luckily, we're partway there on some of the machines, looking here, but we've got big gaps to fill on others and a closing period of time in which to do that. So Australia is the solar miracle of the world. We have the cheapest installed solar, and we have positive stories of households across the country talking about the benefits and cost savings they've seen as a result. But we're not all the way there, but we're on to a good start. Batteries is a real opportunity, particularly those homes that already have solar in terms of their electrification journey. That will make a lot of sense for them. Obviously, EV chargers and EVs themselves have got a big uptake to do. And cooking hot water and home heating and cooling, we're partway there, but a lot of work to do on the electrification of everything. And look, the benefits, it's more efficient to electrify, and households will save between $3,000 and $5,000 a year once they electrify everything. And it's not just us saying it. We've got lots of other supporters who've done similar research, including Energy Consumers Australia and the CSIRO, around the savings that households could capture through electrification. The challenge is, though, that electrification retrofits cost a bit more upfront than just replacing like for like when it comes to gas. So over the lifetime of these machines, when they die, we want them to be replaced with electric versions, not their gas counterparts, but we're looking at trying to fill up what that cost is. And this is just the difference in upfront cost. There's also convenience factors. When your gas hot water heater breaks, you want a hot shower tomorrow, so you're going to try and find whatever appliance allows you to have that installed as quickly as possible. But that upfront costs pays off over the long term when the operating costs are lower, which is where we're reaping savings. But there's an equity issue around who can access those upfront costs. And that's when we look at those who are in the most energy stressed homes are going to be those that find it hardest to cover the additional upfront costs, but also to be able to access conventional credit products. So the Pure Fund that we've looked at, the $1 billion that's been invested by the federal government, will do great things around unlocking finance for a lot of homes to be able to access and purchase electric appliances in their upgrades. However, they, at this stage, looking like conventional credit products, which will still lock out a lot of homes, including those who are already in energy stress. And if we leave the lower income homes behind, it's not just an equity issue in terms of locking in higher energy costs in the long term. We also look at what the death spirals could look like in terms of a reducing number of homes servicing a gas network that looks the same size. And so this graph here, and again, I apologise for the graphs, we'll replace them with beaches, I think. If you're looking, this is some data from New York looking at projected rates of people exiting the gas networks, and then what that then looks like in terms of those daily charges or yearly charges. And so that last graph, if you're seeing, I can't quite see 90% drop off, you can see quite a steep increase in what that costs for those that are remaining on the network. And so if we look at who electrification finance is for, so we've spent a lot of time thinking of finance is going to be a key tool in terms of providing access to the upgrades that we need to lock in future energy savings. And who is this for? It is largely for property owners. Renters are critical in this, but at the end of the day, every home that we need to electrify is owned by someone. And so if we look at the breakdown of our housing, we've got a large chunk of those who are living in their homes and owning their homes, and also renters. But we need to find products that actually incentivise all homeowners, regardless of whether they're landlords or whether they're living in those homes, of them investing in upgrading that particular home. And we've got precedents in this in Australia in terms of big nation projects where the government has supported the provision of finance in order to be able to transform or invest or change. So we've spent a bit of time of like, what are the similar large policies that have done something similar? And we got stuck on HECS. So HECS help loans were used to invest in people's education. So they don't pay when they're studying, they pay when they have capacity and reaping the benefits of that education. So as a concept, it seemed like a nice analogy with electrification. We don't want people to have to pay up front, we want them to pay over time when they have the capacity or when they're capturing those savings. And so with some support from an ECA grant, thank you very much ECA, we've been working with ANU and Bruce Chapman, who's an academic there and considered the godfather of HECS and its design of what could a HECS for households look like. And so we're doing some modelling and hoping to release that in some reports later this year, but also using that in advocacy with the government. Of course, this is not translated well to slides. This table looked different when I put it together. So I'll try and remember what it said and talk to it. But HECS is different to homes. Education is different. We're looking at a similar size loan, but our target populations are slightly different. Young people take out HECS. Older property owners would be taking out loans to electrify. And students are generally asset poor. Homeowners, not so asset poor. So there's some differences in what that looks like in terms of how program design or policy design, but the basis of it is still there, and I'm really going to have to skip this slide now. And I think it's important to recognise, though, that property owners also include a lot of low-income households. I think of someone who's in a generation feeling locked out of the housing market, that anyone who owns a property is like the monopoly man and super rich, but it's not necessarily the case. And looking at income quintiles, a large proportion of people in the lowest two income quintiles do own homes. And so how do we help them unlock some of what they've got in that asset ownership to help them leverage that and reduce their ongoing living costs through energy bill reductions? And it's also useful to note that mortgages are much more common in higher income homes. So if we look at things like adding additional costs of retrofits onto a mortgage, that's not always practical because a lot of lower income homeowners don't actually have mortgages and currently own their homes outright. So it affects the kind of existing commercial products that might be available. So in that, we're kind of opening all these different options of what could this look like and running through some of the existing concessional loans and products that are available, but doing some brainstorming on what else could we think about. We need to get creative in terms of how do we make this accessible, and now is the time to dream big, to hit big targets. So we've got concessional green loans. These are already on offer largely through a number of banks, but also something that the government's been looking at providing through the money they announced in the budget last year. They're going to be really great, but they're only going to hit certain number of homes in terms of those who are feeling more comfortable taking on debt, and they might not be reaching down to those who are asset rich but income poor. So the things looking at income contingent loans, similar to HECS, you're taking out a loan but paying it off when you have the capacity to pay through your income, or perhaps property contingent loans where the loan is sitting on the household and is repaid at the time of sale. There's some great work being done on exploring options around savings contingent loans through retailers, and also the role that councils might be able to play through loan repayments, and there's some international examples there. So this is a bit of we're looking at some options. Keen to talk to others who have done some great work on this. I know ACOS has done some really big thinking on financing options as well, but this is the time to think big. So just wanted to present some of those ideas and say there's some work coming out and it's in progress with the support of ECA. And just really quickly, what about renters? It is so critical. We need to find levers that make this accessible but also attractive to landlords. And so recognising that we need the landlords to actually invest in this, but it's not going to be enough. We need some carrots and maybe some sticks to make that happen too. One thing we've been looking at is mandatory disclosure of normalised historical energy bills. So we've mocked up what they could look like, but if you had an idea when you were renting a home what that expected energy bills might look like on a per weekly basis, that makes more rational decisions to be able to be made, and some market nudges around actually having electric appliances that are efficient and solar on a roof is actually making that a more attractive property. So these looks like some very nice houses in the examples, but looking at the last two, you might be prepared to pay $20 a week more in rent if you're seeing such a significant reduction in what you'd be paying in the energy bills there, and that kind of transparency would allow renters to make some real decisions, but also nudge landlords into that investment. And apartments, finance again critical, but also some other policy options and nudges are going to be needed, and of course also EVs. We need to include those as part of the broader electrification picture, so I can take those as questions because I'm all out of time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kate, so much there and so much more to explore. As you've mentioned, I think this is just the beginning of today's conversation, and looking forward to questions from the audience and questions over drinks this evening as well. Before I hand over to Damien for his presentation, I just wanted to share a reflection and ask you a follow-up question, Kate. And I am going to be plagiarising a quote from someone else. I was trawling the ECA LinkedIn page ahead of the forum today, and I read a comment, and I'm sorry I didn't note the name of the person who'd made the comment on ECA's LinkedIn page, but I read a comment from a consumer advocate who I think is probably in the room today that said we're in a tomato sauce moment, and what they were talking about is that we find ourselves in a situation where we've been thumping the bottle for so long and suddenly it started to flow. So I thought it's great, and whoever came up with that, kudos to you. But I was just going to say, in your presentation, you reflected on a number of levers available to the Commonwealth Government. You highlighted priority areas for action at that national level. You made references to work that's happening at a state and territory level. You mentioned local government as well, which there's lots of interesting things and capacity for local government to kind of lean in as well. What do you see as the role of the federal government in aligning, supporting, strengthening that kind of action, that state and territory action, that local government action across different schemes, rebates? Just wondering, Kate, if you've got some reflections about some really kind of practical, tangible things that could assist with that alignment piece.
It's a big question. Look, I think it's going to take all levels of government, and if you look at the local government level, I think they're the most trusted level of government that are going to be able to provide really clear messages that get out to communities as to why and some how. And a bit of a shout out to Donna, who I know is doing some really fantastic work, Donna Luckman from Merribeck Council, on creating those resources. State governments are doing great work, some states better than others, but generally some really good work of having those rebates. I find, again, some states are better than others, but they're often difficult to navigate, and trying to figure out what actually is the package of support looking like if you want to electrify as a whole. And I think the federal government can help set some big picture and big vision that can inspire states to really invest money, and the federal government really needs to put up, kind of use their national capacity to drive bigger national messages, but also some of those mechanisms like financing that are going to work better when we can get them running at scale, and recognising that this is a big job, so using the scale of the federal government to drive education, but also resourcing and supporting states in the work they're doing.
Thank you so much, Kate. It's now my pleasure to introduce Damien Sullivan from the Brotherhood of St Laurence. Damien is the Senior Manager, Equity and Response to Climate Change at the Brotherhood. I know at VCOS we work really closely with Damien and colleagues, and I know Damien will be embarrassed by me saying this, but he really has carved out a reputation as one of the most thoughtful and compelling voices on that intersection of social equity and environmental sustainability. I'm really looking forward to hearing from you today. So please join me in welcoming Damien.
Thanks, Deb. Damien Sullivan, Brotherhood of St Laurence. It's an absolute pleasure to be here today with you all. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land upon which we are meeting, the Gadigal people, and pay my respects to elders past and present. I'm delighted to be speaking on this critical topic of electrification and equity. And I commend for ECA for their excellent work that they're doing in this space as well. The BSL is a national social justice organisation based in Melbourne with a mission to help achieve an Australia free of poverty. Over the past 15 years, we've done extensive research, policy and advocacy, making the case for systemic reforms to secure affordable energy and fast, fair emissions reduction. The BSL's interest in climate change is because of the impact it will have on people facing disadvantage, such as heat waves and extreme weather events like we've just seen in Victoria, and the importance of a fair transition to a low-carbon society, including enabling those on low incomes to access the opportunities like healthier homes or jobs in the low-carbon economy. One component of our work has been assisting around 10,000 people with energy affordability advice or accessing support, and providing over 1,000 home energy efficiency upgrades. And this work has given us vital insights into the challenges facing those we work with. There's 3 key points I wanted to start with. The first is that home electrification is a critical step in Australia moving towards net zero. Recent reports by Grattan Institute, ECA, Rewiring Australia have made a compelling case for explaining why we need to act now. And nationally, around 50% of homes have a gas connection. Electrifying our homes, however, is a very big job. To give just one example, the Grattan Institute have identified that 274 gas hot water systems will need to be replaced each day in Victoria alone to reach all electric by 2045. Fortunately, if we start soon, much of that can be covered by end-of-life replacements. Done well, and this is a key reason why BSL is interested in the topic, done well, electrification can help reduce energy stress, improve affordability and reduce energy-related poverty. This is particularly important as we face high cost of living pressures. The Victorian government, for example, identified going all electric can save households around $1,000 per year on energy bills, or $1,700 for those with rooftop solar, which is a really large saving. Electrification will also reduce emissions and could lead to a better and more reliable energy system. However, done poorly, electrification could push people into energy stress and exacerbate inequities in the energy system that already exist and beyond. To give a prime example, as we electrify, those people left on the residential gas network will be left paying a larger share of the gas network costs, which will rise higher and higher as more people leave the network. ECA has estimated that average network costs across Australia for an average user will have risen from $280 now to $690 in 2040 and $1,170, and this is just for the network component of the bill. So there's big rises coming for those people who stay on the network. Well optimistic about the opportunities of electrification, we are concerned that without action, those on low incomes, renters, people living in poor quality housing will be left footing higher gas bills as wealthier households voluntarily exit the gas system. To better understand the attitudes of people on low incomes to electrification, and the barriers they face, we recently undertook a piece of research enabling electrification with Dr. Sangeetha Chandrasekaran and Julia De Bruin at the Life Course Centre. This was supported by Energy Consumers Australia. As part of the research, we surveyed 220 people and undertook focus groups with 34 people. The participants faced significantly higher levels of financial stress than the general population. I won't go through all the insights, but we were surprised that 69% of those we surveyed supported electrification, a higher figure than we expected. However, only 13% had replaced a gas appliance in the past 5 years, and only 34% were planning to replace one in the next 5 years. So there was a clear gap between support and intention to take action. And although financial considerations were top of mind, doing the right thing for the environment came in a close second in most cases. Just wanted to step you through a participant journey that we developed for the research to give you an idea of some of the opportunities we're missing. Maria is an older homeowner who is a first-generation immigrant and lives in the western suburbs of Melbourne. She's confident in her ability to access information online, including through her local council's website, and has already sought energy efficiency upgrades for her home. Nevertheless, when her gas hot water system broke down, she replaced it with another gas system. This was despite having recently inherited money that could have covered the cost of an all-electric alternative. This was because Maria was unaware of electric alternatives that might have lower running costs and less environmental impact. She was also unaware of the government support available at the time. Maria is now interested in electrifying her home, but lacks the finances, even with rebates and an interest-free loan. Another major barrier for Maria is her lack of trust in retailers and installers, compounded by the risk of mistakes. As she says, if I make a mistake, I don't have the resources, being on a pension, to wear that. The second participant I want to mention was Diego, who described himself as a lifetime renter. He had a very good relationship with his rental provider and expressed a strong environmental outlook. When his gas heater broke down, he requested it be fixed or replaced, which the rental provider did so promptly. However, when we spoke to Diego, he expressed some disappointment that he hadn't known about government rebates that were available at the time to reduce the price of reverse cycle air conditioning, which, as we know, is a very efficient heater. Diego believed his rental provider probably would have agreed to the reverse cycle air conditioner, which would have lowered his bills and helped the environment. Now the house is locked into a gas heating system, which is likely to last around 20 years. These examples highlight some of the barriers that came through strongly in the research. And I would just like to point to 3 of the barriers and the actions that we think can help make sure low-income households aren't footing the bill on the gas network. The first, a lack of access to funds to make the upgrades happen. Here we see a critical role for targeted rebates, which help lower the upfront costs of the new product. The second, being unsure of who and what information to trust, and related uncertainty about the benefits of electric versus gas appliances. And here we see the importance of using existing trusted channels such as councils or not-for-profit organisations, and also a role for one-stop shops that have been talked about by ECA and others, with advice tailored to the specific needs of different households and communities. The importance of engaging with diverse communities is also critical, and ensuring these communities have the resources to develop solutions for their own communities is really important too. The example of Diego also illustrates the challenges faced by renters, and we would see a need for a specific strategy for renters, including support for funded upgrades in public and community housing, and the progressive introduction of energy efficiency and electrification standards for all rental properties. Just to finish off, I wanted to mention 3 higher level actions that are needed to complement this household level support. The first, from government, we need clear plans or roadmaps for transitioning away from gas. The ACT and Victoria governments have shown leadership in their approach in this space. And picking up Audrey's idea from this morning, these plans should be based on the premise of universal access to electrification and affordable energy, and include targets for electrification. Plans really help to provide certainty and will send an essential signal to consumers, energy networks, industry and investors, and also provide a basis for critical workforce planning. Efficient decommissioning of the gas system will also require appropriate governance and planning mechanisms at the energy system level, and we don't think there's adequate measures in place at the moment. For example, if a local area gas upgrade is planned, we would like to consider if the funds could be better used assisting the consumers in that area to electrify their homes and retire the gas network within a small local area. Currently, we don't see where or how this could be made to happen. We also need to stop making the problem worse, and in new gas connections is an obvious place to start. And while we're there, we should stop incentive for consumers to switch to gas appliances, which perversely continue in some areas. So I think just to wrap up, as I think I'm over time, electrification of homes is essential action to help reduce Australian emissions and contribute to a safe climate. Done well, we think it can help secure affordable energy for all and reduce energy poverty. However, to achieve that, we need to start acting now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Damien. Just a question from me, Damien, before I bring the other panellists back into the conversation, and also just a quick reminder to the audience to get involved in the conversation, submit your questions to our panel via the app, and I might just use this for a bit of housekeeping. Angela, I've forgotten to bring the iPad up with me, so if you wouldn't mind grabbing it, thank you. I've failed in that part of my chairing duties. But Damien, you've reflected on the fact that we need a rapid transition, but we also need that transition to be just. And you've touched briefly on the opportunity to help renters realise the benefits of electrification through the introduction of minimum rental standards for energy efficiency and electrification. Are you able to kind of expand on that a little bit more? What else do we need to be thinking about to ensure that low income and other renters are not left behind?
Yeah, this is an essential issue. I think renters get it incredibly tough. We've seen that with the inequities in access to rooftop solar, and a number of people in this room have pointed those inequities out. And people with solar were much more likely to be ready and open to electrification in our research. So it's a really important issue that we assist renters to be part of this change. I think the measures that I've mentioned are some of the key ones in terms of it's essential that we do upgrades within public and community housing, and this can help develop up the supply chains and the markets for the work. And as I think it was Grattan Institute pointed out, it should be incorporated into the upgrade cycle of appliances within those dwellings as well to reduce the costs. For private renters, I think we can't just wait. We know this from past programs for voluntary action from rental providers. We do need to put in place mandatory standards for electrification within, and that's a state-based, primarily a state-based approach, but the federal government is developing a framework for mandatory standards for energy efficiency, which we hope will include electrification as well. So that's absolutely critical as well. Innovative approaches like the Sunshine Solar from WA, enabling renters to buy into solar farms and the like, we would also like to see and think that there's probably many more opportunities there to open up the space for renters to get the benefits of this new energy environment.
Great, thank you so much. Angela, I'm going to get you to just come up and adjust this iPad for me. Sorry, I've lost the questions on there. Sorry, Angela. While I do that, I might just, invite the panel in. I've got a question before I turn to audience questions. So this is one for all of the panel. Again, just reflecting on, Damien's presentation, a strong message, well, from your research, Damien, and, the Brotherhood's of St Laurence's work more generally, is that equity-centred electrification policies need to be community-driven and defined. So I'm interested in the panel's reflections on this. I know from a VCOS perspective, we call a lot on community leaders, whether they're First Nations leaders, leaders of, say, migrant refugee communities, women's groups, for example, to kind of lean into spaces, step up, lead, for example, during the COVID period, public health messaging to communities, tailoring that message, etc. And I'm just thinking about, many of the community groups whose wisdom, leadership, networks that we want and need to leverage into the electrification space. They're under the pump to address so many, environmental, economic and social justice issues. So I'm just thinking about the very real capacity constraints for community groups, for community leaders that we need to, be on this journey with us. What are some of the ways that we can enable diverse communities to effectively participate in the building electrification conversation? Evette, for example, I'm wondering around, if there's anything further that you could share about, how First Nations wisdom, leadership, ways of working were kind of engaged or leveraged in Esperance, for example. But Damien, you'll have many thoughts and reflections, and Kate, you will as well. Who'd like to go first with that?
I'm happy to start. I think it's a really interesting one. A lot of the work that we do, and it's pointing to one of the questions from the audience as well, is we do operate in quite small, when I say isolated, but unique locations. And I think that a lot of the work that we do has to be tailored to the audience that you're working with and that customer base and their sentiments. So I think that, the way that you would look at that is who are the primary players in that community. So we would always leverage stakeholders like the local councils, chambers of commerce, local businesses individually, and they obviously, through that education piece, gives them a real opportunity to share the learnings within the community, I think. So leveraging specific stakeholders.
Great. Kate or Damien, would you like to jump in with any reflections?
Do you want to go, sorry?
You go.
I will go. I think that there's a really natural audience for our message in electrification of those who really want to do it for the environmental reasons, and we've kind of really done that well, spoken to that group. We've also got a group of mostly older men who really like talking about energy efficiency and all the tech and gadgets, and I think we've got that crew kind of sorted, but there is a big job of getting everyone else in between. Really echo the comments that Damien made of a lot of people aren't going to be doing this for environmental reasons, so we need to really make the economic argument, and diversity of that is really critical too. We work with a lot of other fantastic NGOs and advocacy groups that speak to different constituents and groups, but they need more support to do that. That's a small part of their work. So I'd also echo the suggestions that Damien made around properly resourcing these kinds of messages so that they can get out to the right people. And we've also been doing some work in the last 6 months of working with localised community volunteer groups of, electrify my community campaigns, because people do trust the mum at pickup who's talking about the heat pump that they just installed, or their friend at the pub, far more than they do the solar installer who's selling them something online, or others. So really leveraging localised community connections and stories, and sharing how people have done this well and how they have saved money, so feels a bit real. And I think that's something Esperance, that video was fantastic. I loved all of those case studies there, but a lot more of that work, and having people talking about it and having different voices opposed to those very passionate men who I think will play a great role, but we can have more voices too.
And through the work that we did with the Life Course Centre, we did a focus group with one of the Burmese speaking communities in Melbourne. And what came through very strongly there was, one, a real attachment to gas cooking, which other people would have identified as well. And also that point that Kate's making in terms of wanting to get information through their own networks as well, and including somebody who'd installed rooftop solar with a solar provider from within the community. And so I think there's a real importance in terms of looking at the local tradespeople and making sure that any training we're doing is reaching the diversity of tradespeople within the community as well. But I would certainly just reiterate those points in terms of resourcing the communities that are doing the work. Voices for Power in Sydney are doing a lot of work in this space, and there are others, and making sure that the communities have the time and resources to engage in with appropriate information as well, and looking at the concerns, legitimate concerns people have, and one of the big ones that will come up is around gas cooking, I think.
Thank you so much. And I think just reflecting on that dimension of kind of digital exclusion, digital literacy, etc. And one of the questions that we have in the audience, well, there's a comment and a question, and the comment is, I'm glad we have honest reflection on reality that digital engagement does not work for all consumers, and a multi-pronged approach is needed for effective consumer engagement. How can we ensure this is acknowledged and factored in for all future initiatives and consumer engagement strategies? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think it's a critical path. I mean, a lot of us like digital engagement. I certainly do. I can do it after hours and at my own time frame. So I think it's a really important pathway, but I think it has to be part of a broader engagement strategy, and I think we need to be really conscious of those with not only lower energy literacy, but about lower literacy on the whole, and those that don't have English as a first language. A number of our communities, about how you can use ways to translate that content within that community is really important, I think. Really critically important as a pathway, but not the sole pathway.
Fantastic. I think as well, just talking with people, not just at them, and creating places where people can have conversations and talk about their hesitancies or test out the cooking, and finding lots of places, whether they're online or in person as well, to have conversations about this and actually debate it.
And certainly with some of the work we've done, when we've done some projects that are specifically focused on people with limited even mobile or email access, and what we've found is that the perspective is somewhat different at times, and what people want is a little bit different. So incorporating that non-digital communication channels, I know it's more expensive and it's harder, but we need to do it in this transition.
Great. Another question, Evette, just going back to the Esperance story. Someone's commented, I love the Esperance story, but you had a very defined timeline to get off gas, and also with a small population, you could take a really individualised approach. What are some learnings or things you did that you'd recommend for larger scale communities and longer timelines?
Yeah, I think we are in a really unique position to be able to offer a lot more tailored and individualised service, and we have like a depot at each of our main locations where people can come and ask questions. So I do think there is some real benefits to doing that, but it's not always applicable. I do think things like holding community information sessions, things like speed dating on specific topics, whether you've got subject matter experts that are available that you can go and tap into, digital channels, small videos that are explainers. I think any of those ways that you've got multiple touch points is really important for people to have a better understanding of how those things work.
Great. Before I head to the next question, any other comments from the panel at all on that? Great. One of the other questions is how will poor resilience, so for example Victoria at the moment, impact the feasibility of electrification? This person is commenting that I know that we don't want to be spreading this sentiment in the public sphere, but among energy friends, how serious is this link?
Who wants to take that one?
It might be a better place there. I think we look at also the opportunity to really pair electrification with people's own solar and boosting our rooftop solar. There's a real opportunity there, but I think that might be better dealt with in the next session.
Yeah. One of the other questions that's come up, and Evette, you're in hot demand here. People want to tap into your knowledge and expertise. So with the Horizon Power work, how did it engage strata-managed dwellings and renters?
I read that question. I thought, I don't know the answer to it. So I think there was multiple touch points, obviously, and the communication with the mail outs, like the direct email as well as the phone calls, would have been directly to the whoever the renter was, as well as the strata company. So I'm sure that there was multiple channels within a property, because you obviously need to arrange for access and the like. So I'm sure the channels that I've mentioned have been deployed for both, the kind of strata companies as well as to the individuals within the property as well as the homeowners. Yeah.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, I mean, this is a really critical issue in terms of, and it's probably going to be some of the harder dwellings to transform to electric only. So it's got to be something that's on the list but shouldn't slow us down from the electrification journey, but it will require specific work to look at those larger buildings that are gas. But it's also a reason to ensure we're not building more buildings now with gas because of the costs involved in transforming them and the lifetime that they'll have, their asset life.
Thank you. Lots of really big questions coming through, and I guess it's hard to know in this context. There's so many big conversations that we're having over the course of today. What sits in this space right now, and what kind of then tips us into the next conversation on the agenda. But one of the questions here is, how do we best challenge the consumer choice narrative / excuse that governments in the gas industry currently use to avoid addressing the need to retire the residential gas network? Big question there. Kate, I'm looking at you. Do you want to engage with that one?
I feel like leaning into choice, but in a different way. Like, lots of people don't have that choice to go all electric. When we look at renters, particularly, and the story of Diego was really kind of real of, well, what choice is actually being provided to people to choose to go electric if they want to get off gas. I think that choice has to go both ways, and we need to make it easier for people to make the choice to go electric. And also, it's about a consumer choice. When you're looking at two products next to each other, how do we make the choice of electric the far more attractive one, and really selling the benefits longer term, but making that easier choice up front. So take it on board, but I think that what we're doing right now in the policy settings we have, and particularly around the structures and choices that renters have, we don't have a situation where people can choose to take an option where will reduce their energy bills and also improve their healthiness and comfort of their home. That's not a choice that's being provided to most households currently. So we need to change the policy settings so we do have choice.
Thank you. Another question, Kate, maybe this is one that you start with as well. So the comment in terms of setting up the question is, many mortgage holders are currently saying they cannot take another interest rate hike. Many are highly leveraged. So how can the journey to electrification work if many cannot afford to take on any more debt at all, even at 0% interest? They still need to service the loan somehow.
Yeah, and that's, I think, a really pressing issue that was informing some of our thinking around what are the other loan options that don't add to someone's debt backpack or making them feel like they're over-leveraged. And one of the options we're looking at of exploring is, what if it is attached to the home and the debt isn't repaid until the home sells? And so maybe there'd be small repayments, maybe not, but having something sitting on a home that isn't adding to a repayment obligation in the short term, but something that can be almost like a set and forget and dealt with later when the home sells later on. Because I think that is the real limitation of zero interest loans. Whilst with rising interest rates, a lower interest rate is attractive, it's still more debt. And I think practically, but even psychologically, that's going to be a big barrier for a lot of homes.
Damien? Thank you, Kate.
And I think for many of the people we work with, electrification has been and is likely to be more of a journey than a single moment in time. And so that the costs are likely to be spread out over time. And to that end, providing the information and the ability to take action at the time of replacement when an appliance breaks down, I think is critically important in lowering the costs relative to a big outlay of a big whole-of-home electrification type approach, which in some ways the whole-of-home approach might be ideal, but in many cases it's more likely to be a plan over time where people slowly upgrade different appliances and then jump off the whole gas network, if you like.
Yeah.
I agree with that, and I think for us it's kind of thinking about how do you cover that cost differential between a cheaper cost of a gas replacement appliance and the electric one, but they are going to take part over a long period of time as things get near or end of life. It's not all at once.
Thank you. This next question, and Damien, I'd be really interested in the equity kind of dimension that you bring to this one, is around, the question is, should we be encouraging people to get rid of appliances before they reach end of life? A lot of people hate the idea of this waste and makes upfront costs very expensive.
Yeah, it's a tough one, isn't it? I think in some cases it's going to be a case-by-case basis. So there are essential ducted gas heating, and there was a case example. Due to time, I dropped out there, but there was one of the people we've worked with on our Climate Safe Homes program. She had ducted gas heating, and she wouldn't use it because it was too expensive to run. And she has a chronic health issue which is impacted by the cold. So she was living in a cold home except for one room where she had a reverse cycle air conditioner, and she would stay in bed and stay in the bedroom to keep warm. The rest of the house was cold, and she was really impacted by the changing temperature in different parts of the home. And under that program, we put in place a reverse cycle air conditioner in the living room to use for heating as well, and a rooftop solar system to lower her costs. And so I think in that case, it makes sense to retire that gas ducted system, both environmentally, but definitely from a cost and usage perspective. But in many other cases, I guess, actually, before I say that, I think one of the challenges is that if people wait to say a gas hot water breaks down, then they call a plumber, the plumber comes over, and they're likely to go for a like-for-like replacement, in part due to time, but also the advice from the plumber. So you need to do this sort of preemptive planning, if you like, and potentially even preemptively upgrade the hot water system. So I think there's a bit of both. Yes, we don't want appliances that have been put in 3 years ago to be replaced yet, I don't think. But at the same time, we don't want to leave an appliance that's 17 years old. Perhaps it's time to replace that hot water system with an electric heat pump.
Thank you. Any other comments from the panel before I throw to the next question? No? Great. I'm going to come back to Esperance in a moment, Evette, but perhaps if I kind of stay in the kind of the part of the world, Damien, that your organisation is kind of very connected with and very kind of attuned to, which is about those deep connections with migrant communities. I think your organisation, many other community sector organisations have really built strong relationships of trust and kind of, deep kind of research which leverages that kind of lived and living experience like into this electrification conversation. So one of the audience members has just reflected that some migrant communities will struggle to transition out of gas, and the economic benefits argument is unlikely to be relevant to them. Many live in all-electric homes and they cook on portable gas stoves using gas cylinders. How can we ensure the messaging related to the need to transition out of gas includes information and data related to the health impact of gas cooking and heating?
I think there's engaging with those communities and providing that information through the communities is very important. At the moment, there's probably not sufficient trusted places to go for that information. So the ideas around a one-stop shop, which I think we're going to hear more about tomorrow, are a really good alternative, I think, where people can go to get independent, trusted advice, which ideally could then be tailored for the specific needs of specific communities. And I think that's really important. It's very interesting that people are using bottled gas within their homes now, and that's their cooking source. So the extent to which that remains, I think it's going to be, as people see how good induction is, and some of the work from Horizon in WA is really instructive in this regard, it's likely that many people will start to say, oh, okay, we're quite open to using induction when it works so well. So that's how we would like to see it. I think it's a bit tangential, but one of the things that comes up for us too, and it came up in the video, is that people do want the high quality appliances. So one of the challenges will be, and somebody in one of the focus groups who lived in public housing said this to us, is she said, look, this is all well and good, but we're not going to get the fancy induction. We're going to get a shitty electric stove, and that's not going to be very good to cook on. And if that starts to happen, whether that's for culturally and linguistically diverse communities or for others, then that's going to really put a dent into this process. So we need to see how we can ensure quality rolls out. And that probably also goes for things like upgrade programs as well.
Great, thank you. So just going back to Esperance, and I'm conscious of time, we don't have much more time left, but there's a comment, Evette, the Esperance electrification seems very expensive per household. What are the opportunities to do this more cheaply and at scale? So throw to you in the first instance and then welcome other panel members. Chipping in.
That 26,000, obviously that's across commercial. I think from memory it was about $9,000 per residential property. So it just depends obviously on what you're trying to replace and how specific and bespoke you have to be around the services. I do think that that there is some opportunities as you roll it out to maybe, when I say less complex, 700 kilometres away from Perth. So if you're rolling it out in a metropolitan area, presumably provision of services for electricians and plumbers and the like would be cheaper than what it would be in some of the regional areas of Western Australia. And when you start getting, the volumes of this coming through, I'm assuming that there would also be a reduction in the cost of some of those appliance replacements. But I do think that there's another question on there around, that kind of government support. And obviously it's a lot easier when you are doing a fully government-backed project to implement something like this. But there is a lot of support out there for helping customers transition across to renewable solutions. And I think it's about finding ways in a cohesive way to be able to capitalise on that government funding to try and reduce the cost. And just pulling on one of those points is how do you get like a co-funded option with customers. So we did that in a project in Esperance where we try to get really, in Onslow, another one of our small communities where we were really trying to get high behind the meter uptake of solar and batteries. And that was a co-funded. So it was really subsidised, but it was co-funded and customers had to put their hand in their own pocket, and they did. So I think there's various ways that you can look for opportunities to get people to participate in this.
Yeah.
Point as well, it's not necessarily everything all at once, so that's a cost that's going to be spread over 10 to 15 years for many households.
Great. Just another question that we had as well. Sorry, I'm just on that theme of kind of cost. So again, a comment and then a question. The comment was, it's wonderful that there are some government-backed interest-free loans to help electrify our homes. However, when I looked at using one of these loans for myself, I found the government-backed companies were quoting significantly more than just engaging an independent electrician. How do we prevent suppliers taking advantage of these schemes and inflating costs and hence their profits?
Any learnings from Esperance?
Well, I think in Esperance, if you've got predominantly regionally based providers, I think that wouldn't bode well in terms of a reputation and further use of that company. So I think, again, it's probably a little bit different when you're talking about smaller regional communities and how that might have an impact on their business. So, but other than that, I don't have an answer, no.
I can't speak to those particular programs or providers, but I do think that it's really important through this process to not overlook quality and really quality providers and installers, and ensuring that, again, recognising that there is a shortage of electricians and really making sure that the government, in addition to investing in helping homes, investing in that training pipeline, because that's going to take some pressure off costs as well if we've got enough electricians to do the work.
Great.
And I think, just to add, there is a bit of an issue around some of the incentive programs, not specifically that one that was mentioned, but in terms of the quality of things like heat pumps coming through and the like. And I think it's really important that we have strong compliance and quality control measures in any government-related programs or government-mandated programs. And this can actually help drive standards within the industry. But it's really important that we get onto that now and not let things slide, because problems, horror stories have the potential to derail the really good work and the opportunities out there, because there's many, many, many good providers, but you get a few bad cases and it turns things bad.
Great. Kate, just going back to your presentation as well, when you were talking about key opportunities kind of being driven through the federal budget. You're talking about the Home Energy Upgrade Fund. There's a comment here, that fund can electrify just over 40,000 homes. And the question is, what else will it take to close the gap?
Was that fund for, I think it's 40,000 public housing? I wasn't sure if the 40,000 is referenced to. Okay. So I think it might be referencing, so there was money that is available in finance, and then there's additional funding that was paired with states and territories in order to electrify public and community housing, which needs to be a priority. I know Damien touched on it as well, but that can be the place that we can really scale up how to do this well, and also looking at multi-unit dwellings as well, which a lot of public housing, community housing is looking at apartment blocks. I'm not sure what the dollar figures needed needed to be able to do all public and community housing across the country. Damien might have a figure on that, but it's a lot more than the $400 million that was put aside in the budget last year, and that needs to be a priority. And it's a responsibility of both the states and the territories and the federal government, but this is where we need to lead from an equity standpoint, but from a learning standpoint, and also because it's just it's a responsibility of government to update and be a leader in upgrading their own assets.
Kate, while you've got the floor as well, there is a question that's come through about when we change our cars and hot water, we also have a key moment for discussing flexible load and installing controls. How much is this on your radar, and how important is it that we all start telling the use surplus in renewables narrative?
Yep, it's on our radar for sure. We've been doing some work at looking at hopefully running a trial in northern Illawarra, looking at what it takes to electrify a suburb and particularly the impact that has on flexible loads and how we can help manage that. I think there's also a behavioural piece on encouraging people to shift usage into their solar windows, so it's not just tech-driven. There's a tendency maybe we can complicate the tech that's needed in order to really be shifting usage patterns. But we're certainly looking at that as a bit of an experiment of what that means for the network and locally. And yes, we are also looking at the opportunity to oversupply and the opportunities that then exist and can flow over into industry if we're overproducing what we need.
Great. Now, I know that we've got, big discussions tomorrow, like on the agenda in terms of, this concept of a one-stop shop. But there is like a lot of interest in the room, like right now in the context of this panel discussion. A question there which has had significant kind of votes or ticks of approval from the audience about any thoughts from the panel on how well the SEC in Victoria, that model for electrification will work, and a comment they're positioning themselves as a one-stop shop. So I think this is a subject of deep kind of exploration in Victoria at the moment. We don't exactly know what this will look like, but any, I guess, comments from the panel around what you see as the opportunity and how well this could work? Damien?
I think, as you said, we don't fully know what it's going to look like. I think there's a lot of enthusiasm for this, including within government. I mean, I remember as a kid going to there was a shop on Flinders Street, I think it was opposite what was then Princess Bridge Station, near Flinders Street Station in Melbourne, where you could go and learn about energy and energy efficiency and things like that. And being able to go into somewhere and see some things about energy efficiency was a very nice thing, and it was from a trusted source, and I think my mum probably took us in there and stuff like this. And I think people like that tangibility and like that connection to trust. And in Victoria, there's a lot of love, I think, for the SEC brand as well. Not everyone, of course, but there's quite a lot of love for that old SEC brand. So can't answer specifically, but I think there's a lot of potential hope there about what it might do without knowing exactly what it's going to be.
The only other comment I'd add to that is that I totally agree, and maybe it's because I'm biased because I come from a government entity, but I do think that there is that incumbent trust that comes from having escalation pathways. So, you can go to ombudsmans and the like. So I think a government showing that initiative to drive, a one-stop shop, I think is a fantastic outcome, and I think it'll create a good environment for success.
Echoing all that agreement, and the role that government can play in being a trusted voice is critical, but also recognising that we want a one-stop shop where you can go to get all the stuff done, but we might not just have one-stop shop. And recognise there's got to be a lot of different voices that are going to be connecting better with different groups of people and going to be their preferred go-to or a more trusted source. So I think one-stop shops and centralised ones that are really well-known, great branding, easy to go to, we need those, but we're going to need several one-stop shops.
Yeah, and I think it's really important not to conflate this idea of like a one-stop shop with one-size-all-fits solutions as well. And that's one of the comments and questions that's come through the audience as well. How do we best ensure that governments provide targeted supports to those most in need? We've been hearing that some decision makers want a one-size-fits-all approach to electrification. Any thoughts on that?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, sure. So it's the question is, how do we best ensure that governments provide targeted supports to those most in need? And I think what they're getting at is the need for kind of tailored, kind of calibrated approaches. So how do we kind of build nuance into that and avoid one-size-fits-all approaches to electrification?
A better understanding, I mean, there is an understanding as well of recognising the different segments and the different needs that they will have, and I think governments know that, and we've talked about a lot of those cohorts today, but really recognising that renters need a really tailored solution, and we need to do a lot of work, and government needs to invest in really targeted policy design of how they're going to help renters, and units and strata, I think, are another key cohort, but really recognising and showing us that there is a plan for these specific groups, because there's a lot of advocacy happening around that, but just really seeing that they're recognised as they're going to need something extra.
Sure. Evette, if we go back to Esperance, again, we've got a question in there just wanting to kind of interrogate a bit further what was going on for businesses in that community. What sort of energy use did the businesses have that was so hard to replace?
From memory, it was grain drying facilities, and I think a large-scale laundromat were the ones where it didn't necessarily have replacement appliances that could go into that facility.
Yep, great. We're going to wrap up shortly. We're going to invite some final reflections from the panel, but I might take one or two more audience questions. One that's been sitting there that's got significant upvotes, Kate, so I might throw to that one, is a question around, and we might have covered some dimensions of this earlier on in the discussion, but does Rewiring Australia's work ideas extend to policies to upgrade homes to improve thermal efficiency and therefore lower energy use? You able to share some thoughts on that?
Yeah. So the home energy upgrade schemes that the federal government announced includes thermal upgrades to homes, and recognising that paired with electrification, thermal upgrades will help reduce overall energy use and energy costs. Our focus is really on how we electrify and get fossil fuels out of the home, but recognising that, yes, there's some really big impacts that can happen when those things are paired together, and there's some great work that other organisations are doing of really mapping out what that looks like in the pathways. And I think they've been captured in policies that have been announced to date as well.
I think it would be a mistake to separate the two at a household level. Like, we really need to integrate energy efficiency upgrades with electrification.
Yep, great. Fantastic. So we've got just over 5 minutes left. So perhaps what I might do is just, because we've covered so much ground in this panel, it's a big topic, and we've gone every which way with it. So perhaps, I guess, some reflections from me. You know, in a room like this, I think, the sense of urgency around building electrification is palpable. You would expect that in this room. I guess a common thread, we've got 3 people coming from really different but kind of complementary perspectives on the panel today. But I think one of the common themes is that it's really important that we make this conversation and this movement inclusive and accessible outside this room, and to ensure people have, the knowledge, the support, the resources to be able to kind of enact change and genuinely exercise agency and lean into the challenges. I guess, is there, for each of you, is there kind of a headline message that you want to, take home, that you want to share with the audience today, reflecting on, the theme of this panel, which was about barriers and benefits to electrification? What's a headline message that each of you would want to share with this group today?
I suppose from my perspective, it's that everyone needs to lean in, and it has to be obviously a customer-led approach. If you're asking them to participate in the outcomes of it, they really need to buy in early in the process. But it has to be from a government perspective. It has to be from an industry perspective. It has to be from a homeowner perspective. It has to be from a contractor and installation perspective. I think that if you can't activate that entire value chain, you aren't going to deliver on what would be a really critical part of this of the decarbonisation process, which is electrification.
Yeah. Thanks, Evette.
We need to be really ambitious and move quickly and convince governments to invest big in how we can help electrify every household in the next 15 years, which is a huge task. But we need that ambition then to be backed up with realising that it is a lot of work. Listening to what it took 400 homes in Esperance, it's going to take a lot of work, and that's going to mean a lot of conversations, resourcing of organisations that can have those conversations and meet people where they're at, because we've got big, bold ideas, but that's not where the country's at, and we've got to do a lot of work of bringing everyone with us too.
Yeah, I would just echo those points. I mean, it is a big job. It's an essential job that, from our perspective, it has to happen, and it's going to happen. So we need to ensure that it happens fairly and equitably, and that can happen fairly and equitably if the appropriate planning and supports are put in place.
Fantastic. A lot to think about, a lot to do, a real sense of urgency, but I think that kind of theme that we've reflected on, which is around like rapid transition, but a just, equitable transition, finding that kind of sweet spot, getting that balance right is really critical. People in this room are critical to kind of leading those conversations, building community momentum, making this conversation accessible, and just getting stuff done. So thank you to everyone. Thanks to Evette, thanks to Kate, thanks to Damien for sharing their expertise, and thank you to everyone in the audience for your enthusiastic engagement and participation. Sorry if we didn't get to your questions. There was a lot there, but look forward to continuing the conversations over the breaks and into the next day. Thanks so much for ECA for hosting this conversation. Thank you.